All right. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining everyone. Sorry about that little technical difficulty I had getting the stream started just a few minutes ago, but I promise I tested this thing 15 times. And when it comes down to it, it always fails. But been really looking forward to this chat. It's been a while since we've actually gotten, together and had a discussion, um but we're definitely going to start doing this far more often. Ideally maybe once a month, because we've got just so many topics, that are so interesting on our page, whether it be topics about Peloton and the platform, the classes that we love and take are the instructors, but some of those challenges that we face as a community, those very particular sort of challenges that it's part of our culture, and sometimes can help us navigate the world that we live in with our sort of dual existences. And what's so cool today is that we get to have this from one of the OG PeLatinas ever, Analisas. She is the one who you see the most on that page, posting challenges, pumping people up, encouraging absolutely everyone, so, she's definitely a fundamental part of who we are for sure. And then, of course, the Peloton's first Spanish speaking bilingual instructor, Mariana, who is also our greatest collaborator, someone who's always been there for our community, um, and, has always been willing to, participate in these discussions. How are you guys?
Muy bien, ¿y tú?
Bien, bien, aquí dándole, feliz.
But it really has gone to a page where we feel like it's a safe space where we can ask these things and not feel judged. So when you brought up the fact that we should discuss this, I was like, see, because at the end of the day, I think for you, you've always just wanted that, like that this page to be like a conversation builder for everyone, and el apoyo y el sí se puede, and unidos vencemos, and I think we definitely need to know that we're not alone in a lot of the challenges and a lot of the day-to-day issues that we see. So
You're
gracias a ti, Victor.
no, you're absolutely right. Thank you. And no, I'm ustedes. O sea, that is really part of the vision, is where it's not a group of 2 or 3 people creating an enormous amount of content, but having everyone just, have a space to be transparent and, really get support from their community. So, and also who just joined us, Dominique, um, I'm really interested in hearing her perspective, and let's get started from what inspired this. So a couple of weeks ago, I went onto the group and I saw this one post, and it's interesting the fact that the poster posted anonymous, right? And I'm gonna read that post here real quick, and there's so much to this, and I love it. And Dominique I'd love for you to speak to some of the feedback that you provided afterwards. But here's what she said. She said, I would love some advice. My kids 15 and 11 are very resistant to learning Spanish. My mom is 80 and doesn't speak as much English, and constantly tells me how disappointed and sad this makes her. I speak to the kids to no avail, wondering about any movies that can touch on this topic or any personal experiences to help me out. And she also added, they take Spanish at school, refuse to practice at home. We can't do full summers there. Mom refuses to come here. The flights are too long. I've looked for tutors, already paying for 2 online programs they don't use. I work full time and can't be on their backs all the time whining about this. It's exhausting. And man, when I read that, I was like, dang, I feel that. My kids are older, and yeah, we may, a lot of this discussion may be like towards kids, but raising a family also is different, right? What if you're in a relationship with a Hispanic or a not Hispanic who doesn't speak Spanish that much? You are also creating a family. So my kids are older, 18 and 17, and 19 and 17. And when I had my kids, I was among my friends who are all having kids at the same time, the ones saying, ah, no, mi hijo va a hablar perfecto, va a hablar y va a escribir perfecto. No, and I mean, I was sure of it. There was no way. And that wasn't necessarily the case, you know, but they have improved a lot for sure. And I know that they are proud of their culture and, you know, where they come from, but they lived a very different reality from me. So with that, Dominica, I'd love for you to kind of give a little bit of what you mentioned in that post.
So part of my feedback, and I did notice also that the person posted anonymous, and that goes to the heart of how personal this is for many people, and for many people how hard it is to try to appeal to here and there. And part of my feedback was how the most important part is that we allow our kids to talk. I mean, the communication is more important than the language that they do it in. And I guess that feedback came from the fact that when my son was growing, I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old girl. And when my son was growing and he was starting to talk, he wanted to communicate. He had to divide his mind between English and Spanish. And as many of you, I saw my friends, older friends who had kids, telling them en español, en español. And I was doing the same thing, but I started to have such a strong communications issues with my kid where he would get so upset because he couldn't communicate until one day I said, like, I don't know how it came to me about, like, I don't mind what language do you do this in, but like, be able to tell me what happened. And with that also, I noticed that every time that I would tell him, like, en español, he won't, like, the sadness. Can you imagine as an adult if you have a friend and they come to you and you are telling, and they're gonna tell you that either something excited or sad, whatever it is the case, and you're like, no, en español. So it is for the kids. It's also really hard. So when I started to see people around me, and I will say kids, I will see the pain. I mean, like, in my eyes, it seemed painful, and I understand also the 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 desire and the discipline that it takes to do those things. So while I admire many parents who are able to be so disciplined, I I feel for the kids that many times I'm not able to communicate because they are being told to in a specific language.
And that's interesting that you say that because for me, soy la Latina en la familia. My sister had her kids, and we're raised, and I'm from El Paso. Like El Paso is like 99% Mexican, todos hablaban español, like legit people. I did not even know that there were other kinds of Hispanics because that's how I mean, siempre en domingo to me, I mean, literally, I grew up watching, you know, Chaelo and Siempre en Domingo and all these shows. So for me, that's all that I knew. My older sister had her children, and my parents were around. And of course, we're first generation, my sister and I, and my brother. And she was so fortunate to be there with my parents, and my parents only speak Spanish, by the way. My dad speaks English, you know, with an accent. But so my nephews had the luxury that my mom, ahí estaba apapachándolos. Si quieres esto, mijo, un burrito, unas enchiladitas. So it was just more natural, and it wasn't necessarily like, vas a hablar español, y vas a hablar español. Era la lengua que se elegía hablarle a los bebés. Now, come to me. I moved when I was 19 years old, and my kids were born in Georgia and Korea and Germany. And guess what? I did not have a lot of Latinos around me. There were very few Latinos around me. So for us, our primary language at home is English because my husband speaks no Spanish. But there were things that I would say to them in Spanish, porque hay ciertas frases que se dicen en español. Saca la basura. Like, that was just normal to me. Like, I'm never like, take the trash out, Mario. No, like, saca la basura, apaga la luz, agarra una cuchara. Like, there was just certain things that I would say to them. They would reply to me like in the language, but it's never forced in my household. Like, they will say things, they understand things, and that's perfectly fine because I'm with you, Dominic. especially as they get older. Like I love that my kids could talk to me, and if they want to talk to me in their slang, which also requires translation, let's be honest, I'm more than happy to do that. But when I go back to El Paso, I notice the difference of it's just the people that you're surrounded by. It's like your family. And I think you said it's super expensive for your mom to come up and travel. Yeah, completely agree. If we had that community of other Spanish speakers and they heard us talking normally, kids pick up stuff up like sponges. Cuando ellos escuchan que yo está hablando con la tía, they're like, you were talking about me. I was like, I was talking about you. It just seems so much more natural to them when they're hearing us speak to others all the time than when you're in Nebraska and speaking English to everyone around, because that's primarily how you need to communicate in Nebraska, or for me in Georgia, or wherever I was, throughout life. So it is very hard, and I completely agree that prioritizing the communication versus how you're choosing to communicate, the language that you're choosing to communicate, is a difference. Porque cuando tienen ya 15, 16, 17 años, es súper difícil decirles, no hables conmigo en esa lengua, en español. And I can't imagine growing up, because for me, I spoke only Spanish until I was 6. Like that was my first language, and I could not imagine my mom telling me, nope, not in Spanish. Give it to me in English. And when I started speaking English, it was just like very natural, y nadie me forzaba que tenía que hablar en inglés o que tenía que hablar en español. Era simplemente era como nos comunicábamos. Y I don't feel that pressure with my children. Like, gracias. And I'm very fortunate that I don't get that pressure from her or from my father on the little that my kids speak Spanish, because they do, entienden, pero hablar ya es otra cosa muy distinta.
Sí. Sí.
I think that there's several factors that go along with, and you mentioned this, Nito, and like, is your partner bilingual? Are you raising them in a household or in a city where they hear it often or not? And as you know, I'm Mexican born, but then moved to San Diego, which is a border city. So that was also in our ear constantly. And there was access to, like, my little nephew now goes to a school where he's taught in Spanish. And I know that there's an opportunity for that because English is going to come.
Yeah.
Like, I think that was my mother's biggest plight when we moved. It was just like, I know that my kids will learn English at some point, like with their friends, like theirs. And then both of my parents spoke Spanish, so I would hear it in the house. But now I'm seeing, as my siblings have married, it's a bilingual household for sure. Like, which is a language that sticks, which is the language that the kids are communicating back in. And even growing up, I remember being around Mexican families that the kids spoke to each other in English. They would communicate amongst themselves in English, even though around them was all in Spanish. And how there's truly a transition, and seeing how, like, some of the comments on here, because when you're a kid, you just don't know. You don't understand. Like, you're just trying to communicate or not
Right.
with your parents. And then there's this, because even though I had it, and I, again, was grateful that my mother, like, was very disciplined about us speaking it in the house. The further I moved away from home, and then I moved to Texas, but it wasn't a border town, and then I moved to Indiana, the less I used it, even though I grew up with it and knew it well, the less I was practicing, the less I retained.
Yep.
Right.
Because it happens. And so, like, some folks have expressed here, I had to take it upon myself to either in college, like, take a Spanish language course, even though I knew it, to be able to practice, to be reading. I had never read in Spanish until I was in college, and I was like, all right, I now know that in order to be able to keep some semblance of this, keep it as a communication tool, I have to, you then, I saw so, like, their kid is going to go into Spanish 1. You start to pick up bits and pieces. My sister-in-law, even though she has Mexican descent, grew up learning English, but she took it upon herself to go to Puebla as an adult, to go into an immersion program to learn so that she could speak Spanish to the kids. So there's different ways, even as we evolve and get older and come into different generations, where, I don't know, take a yoga class in Spanish, or you start to read in Spanish or listen to music in Spanish. Right now, like, that's been such a factor to get people to kind of retake or come back to it.
Absolutely. I think, we're definitely looking at that, everyone's comments that you're putting in here. And, someone just said something really important here that ties into the original sort of comment, because in that original comment that started this whole discussion, there certainly was some shame there, right? As if because these kids are not speaking, are they, it's almost, um, it's almost shameful, that they're not fully their culture. But someone just commented something really cool that I thought is important in this discussion. And she says, I tell my Latino Student Alliance students in high school that being Latino isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. They can feel pride in their heritage, and even if they don't speak Spanish, a lot of them proudly say that they are a no sabo kid. So, I think one thing we have to do is we have to destigmatize if your Spanish isn't perfect.
Yeah.
Look, people, that grew up here, that perhaps never had the opportunity to travel to Latin America, live a very different existence. And I'm going to be fully transparent. For most of my life, I was born here. My parents are from Peru and Chile. I didn't grow up around a single Latino all through high school. And I thought that all Hispanics spoke Spanish because you had to. Obviously I'd been advantaged in the fact that my grandfather lived with us for many years and we had to speak to him in Spanish at home. I had one parent who always spoke to me in Spanish at home. My mother spoke to me more in English. But when I went to college seeking Hispanic friends, the first thing I heard from the first Hispanic friends I'd ever made, Mexican American kids here in Dallas, was, "Why do you speak English like a white guy?" And and I didn't know that. So it's like they literally called me Carlton from the Fresh Prince. But and my immediate response was, "Why don't you speak English or Spanish? Why don't you speak Spanish? You're telling me I speak English weird, but you don't speak Spanish at all." And it was really cool and interesting to interact with that, because I had to learn. They learned about my different Latino upbringing, which was valid, and I had to learn about theirs. They'd been here for generations and grew up at a time where people were corporally punished if their kids spoke Spanish, at school. And so that was like really taken from them. So I think a big part of this is because, like you said, Dominique, if this is a cross to bear, then what's the motivating factor? It's like, just because it breaks your mom's heart. So, and I'm stealing this quote. Somebody's mentioned this. Just because it's going to break your mom's heart that you don't learn Spanish, that's not the reason they're going to push themselves to improve their Spanish. And so
I guess that is something important there, and is how we put more pressure than we should on ourselves, and that comes and obviously that comes from me. Spanish is my first language, so my closest time to speak English without thick accent. But being like one of the things that I have found so sad to see here is how people define Latino based on our language. That's not what defines a Latino. A Latino is our values. A Latino is like, if you see us as a whole, we come from many different countries, from many different opinions. I think that when I think about being a Latino, is about us, about our family, like how family oriented we are, and that doesn't have to do anything with our language. Our language is beautiful. Like, there isn't. I love our Spanish and all that stuff, but with time and being here as an immigrant in this country, and see the sadness in professionals that I work with, and people come and they're like, "Your name is Anna. You speak Spanish, right?" And the person to have to say, "No, I don't speak Spanish," and see the sadness in their face, and you
yeah, I've seen that. You're right.
you don't know if it happened because their parents were not able to teach them. You don't know if it happened because they were not in an environment where there were enough people who speak Spanish to be able to do it. you don't know if the parents were protecting them so they wouldn't be subject to some type of prejudice. So it is just like, if people from outside of our culture do that to us, why do we do it to our own selves? Like, for example, my son, he speaks English in a perfectly, and his Spanish is an Spanglish, a mix or whatever it is. But it's beautiful for him to say, "Buen día, mom." I'm like, I made it. That's okay. And when I'm out of the equation, kids are, I mean, like, as humans, we are so resilient and so smart that when he's in environments where there is only people speaking in Spanish, his Spanish come out. Like, he needs to communicate. So it's gonna do it either way. But it really made me reflect a lot of this conversation about we need to break those situations where we have these high standards of what, like, only one size fits all of what is to be a Latino. Yeah.
But I think you need to make that personal decision with your family, without the external stigma and, stress or whatever it is. I know how to write. I know how to read in Spanish. My sister does not. She's not as fluent. We were not taught proper Spanish. Like, I literally know how to communicate with people, pero yo no fui a la escuela para español. Like, I didn't take Spanish classes the way I took English classes. Like, there was no such thing as a Spanish class in El Paso. Like, that was not the thing. You were taking French, you were taking some other language, but Espanol, excuse me, we're not doing that. But I decided that, of course, our first language had to be Spanish here, because obviously my husband, I mean, we're mastering one language at a time here. We're trying to master the English, but they were learning through school, and I wouldn't try to put extra pressure on them to communicate with me. Like, I would help them study. I would go over vocabulary. I would do all sorts of things. And now we have the luxury. Disney woke up and we now have a bunch of movies that they could see themselves reflected on the screens, with Encanto, with is it Coco, and all these other things that are now the Blue Beetle. They're able to see themselves where before they were, I think, hiding, like, oh, maybe whatever. Now they're like, look, I'm represented.
I've seen a number of TikToks of Hispanic kids putting up videos of some of their favorite artists or actors speaking in Spanish. And so many people had no idea that Pedro Pascal is from Chile, and he speaks perfect Spanish. Like, so many had no idea. And then it's so cool that there's actors such as from Wednesday Adams,
Jenna Ortega.
who is like, yeah, I speak Spanish. It's not perfect, but okay, cool. And so it instead of hiding, it's like a far more open conversation.
Well, to that point, I think it's just generationally has shifted so much, and the pendulum has swung widely in two different ways. Because speaking of Pedro Pascal and how old he is, and I remember in theater, like, don't pronounce your name Mariana Fernandez because that's going to give you away. And so it's like, say Mariana Fernandez, and then, like, you'll just fit. So, and a lot of folks have put in, like, this fitting in. Like, it was just so important to not make waves, not stand out, not like, how do we fit into this puzzle of this country of just. And then in more recent times, then it's become just much more, because one thing I think that we all share is guilt and shame. Like, that is just like a constant. And what Dominique was saying, like, of our values, like, I think that comes attached with just being here and feeling like enough of something. And all of a sudden, like, you want to be proud of that. You want to retake the language or the traditions, and it's, the pendulum has swung in such a different way, which is great, because now I think this is when these conversations start to happen, and it's taking away, like, well, this means Latino or this doesn't mean, like, it just starts to kind of dismantle a lot of the things that we grew up with. And especially as I've been reading here, like whether you came here or you were born here, or the different generations really kind of inflict that on us where we came. And then as we become adults and the society starts to transition, we start to adapt too, to where I told Victor a couple of days ago when we spoke, like I had a sociology teacher in college for college credit who said to me at that time, he's like, well, you're not bicultural if you're not bilingual. And that stuck with me because part of it was like, is that true? Yes. Like, it's not. Like, it doesn't define, but for a long time, I think in the same way that we were all trying to assimilate, then like, you could only be Latino if you spoke Spanish. And that's not true. That's
Right.
been shifted.
I guess someone posted on here about that they wanted to make sure that their children recognize their culture and the language too. And I would say that my kid's Spanish is definitely not perfect and not fluent or anything, pero ellos saben la cultura. They know what it is. And I think that's something that you're not going to take. And that's how we keep, our traditions and kind of going on. Because absolutely, it's not about speaking more than one language. And it really is about continuing those things that we have as a family that in La Nochebuena or whatever throughout the year. That really I feel is more important than the language than they're speaking, like culturally having them understand what it is. It's just so different. And I think now that they're older, because my kids are old, they're 24, 22, and 18, we're able to have those conversations, and now they're more interested in going back. Like you said, Mariana, as they get older, you tend to go back and be like, hey, I want to find out more, I want to study more, I want to learn more. And it's not about the language that they're speaking, it's really about communicating and getting more in touch with their history and their culture, because they have two to get in touch with. It's not just, so we did the 23andMe because I just knew I was India and you could not tell me nothing. I was like, no, necesito a mi abuela. Like it's very important for them to be in touch. It's more than the language.
And it's and language and learning about language isn't necessarily about memorizing vocabulary or memorizing 17 different verb conjugations, but which we can certainly do, and even more in certain places. But what is important, and I think it's if somebody wants to learn, there's got to be a cool factor to it. And it's like I remember explaining to my kids before, and when I learned this, my grandfather taught me that, but they always made it seem like having connections to the Spanish language was so profound because it's developed so much. So, for example, many people, I would assume most Spanish-speaking people, but a lot of non-Spanish Hispanic people don't understand that so much of what we say in Spanish comes from other languages. So, for example, it's so profound. It's like when we say the word ojalá, when we say the word hopefully, it comes directly from inshallah, from the Arabic. Almost every Spanish language word that starts with the letters AL comes from the Arabic. Almohada. Ashuda is azúcar in Arabic, right? So it's all tied and united, and it's a beautiful, beautiful study. And so it's like, that's cool, that. And so perhaps as a tip, I don't know if maybe your family or your kids are older, but getting them to appreciate the beauty of a language, and it's not necessarily just about speaking it perfectly with no accent.
I guess it goes to the heart of learning something with love. And when you, especially those of you who have older kids here, you are talking about how they are looking for that information themselves. If you have an association with the Spanish that comes from the love that your family give you, the love of hearing it, speaking to you, because also when we are telling them, hey, speaking Spanish, habla español. Porque it's not like there is a specific energy that we are placing, like is
Traumatic.
yeah, and the kids are having to receive that information. So how am I gonna be? How am I gonna grow up and love this thing that as a kid was placed on me with so much force? Isn't it more beautiful when, for example, our kids are trying to figure it out and like your descendancy, or is if as an adult, I have seen so many posts of people that have decided to go back to the places where their parents were from, and doing their in their own way. Yeah, they maybe their Spanish when they go to visit those countries is not perfect, but they are seeking something, and seeking the love of where they came from. So, and another thing with in regards to the post, a lot what that person was asking is, what type of shows can I show my kids, or movies? And I think that I think it's good that we show them things that are the mix of what they are. Like when we are talking about Encanto, or Spider-Man, or whatever it is the case, where we see characters that are very much in the same line of what we are living here. This is a very mixed culture, and that's what they are being exposed to. I'm from Colombia. I love my telenovelas. But for me to have an expectation that I'm going to see my kid and that he's going to understand a Colombian telenovela is no, I mean, it's not going to cut it. It's not
Yeah.
going to be interesting for him. Instead, what I try to do, for example, is we watch TV in Spanish, or whatever show he loves to watch, which probably is a very American show. We do it in Spanish. It's not, it is not exactly the same, but they can relate.
Mhm.
Also when they are learning, they can, it's learning in their own context. So when I was thinking about the initial post, I was like, I mean, I will love for my kids to understand my telenovelas, but from here to there is a long el chao. My first try was el chao, and a 5-year-old my son was like, I don't know what is happening here. No, so
Well, unfortunately, that's been part of the evolution too of in the media of seeing, where our stories used to be told in such a narrative, and now it's not just about drug dealers, or like it's obviously become more. And I think of growing up in San Diego, and one of the reasons why, not just because her music has transcended decades, but the movie of Selena, I remember going to see that in the movie theater, and I think that was one of the first movies that told and explained this kind of situation, that you saw yourself reflected in it. Like, you're not Mexican enough to do anything, you're not American enough. Like, it's exhausting. I remember the quote from the dad, and then her going to Mexico and speaking, trying to speak Spanish, and then I'm so excited. It was like those moments were so telling. And this was a movie in the 90s, right? That was reflective of this experience that a lot of us are having by being in this country. And so it's been fascinating to watch how through Disney, through TV shows, like One Day at a Time, when that sadly got canceled because it was just showing like, this is our family situation, a Cuban family situation here in the States. And if we can keep doing that and telling those stories, and I even see it on something shamelessly plugged, Peloton, but because I get to see it there through the people that I get to meet, and hearing this, and even seeing through Camila or Rad, like how wildly different our backgrounds are.
Mhm.
And yet we're connecting to this community that all of us have been trying to be a part of. And like, that's what Victor initially, I think that was the initial spark of this too.
Yeah,
It's like, we're from nowhere and everywhere.
absolutely, absolutely. So okay, just I'm not in any way an an expert in this, but I know we've got bilingual teachers within the PeLatino group, and this chat, the conversation will definitely be recorded and put on the page. But I would love, to learn more from them and hear what their suggestions are. I did have the opportunity to speak to someone, and she said, if you were, as an initial tip, perhaps, because if kids are growing up in a household where there's two Spanish speakers, but the kids are going to school all in English every day, perhaps try I think it's called the one parent language. So try to focus on having one parent focus on communicating in Spanish to the children while the other one speaks in English, right? So that maybe to overcome the challenges that you were talking about, Dominique, yet you have to communicate with them, but so that they're always hearing the language, you know, even in a conversation, they're always hearing the language. And I thought that made a lot of sense to me, you know, that sort of that idea.
Yeah, it is very powerful, and I think it plays the responsibility on the adult. And as adults, we have a lot of agency of what we do.
Yes.
So, for example, yeah, I do speak all the time in Spanish to my kid. Like, he can answer in whatever language he wants, and but he's gonna hear in Spanish. It is, and I have seen it with a lot of people that it works really well.
Yeah. So if it doesn't work perfectly, can I do the very Latino thing and say that if it doesn't work perfectly, no es culpa de la madre, es culpa de la madre. Yes, yeah, tú dijiste. Let's put it on the adult. Es culpa de Ana, qué vergüenza.
Naturally communicate in. So for me, like Mariana, and I'll be on the phone with my mom and I'm like, "Ay, ama, ¿cómo se dice? ¿Cómo se dice?" How you are speaking. Do you normally speak Spanish at home? Because in asking you to speak a language that you're not really speaking, I mean, it might get you to get in touch with it again. And that's awesome. And now you have like a child to go back to. But I naturally do not communicate in English. Like that is not my first language of choice. I speak in Spanish with my mom because that's how I need to communicate with her. But when I'm at home, when I'm just whatever, even like with my brother, who is obviously bilingual, or my cousins, we tend to speak more English or Spanglish than only Spanish, even though I know they're completely fluent and they understand everything that I'm saying. Like it's just so hard for me to stick to just one language because my Spanglish comes and goes, just like in this conversation. I mean, empiezo aquí, termino acá, and then in the middle, I change a little bit. That's exactly how I communicated. So maybe you start with not full Spanish, but maybe you do the Spanglish that you use. So you could show your child like, hey, it's okay to kind of like weave into the two languages, because that's what I did. And Nadia me dijo, hey, try to bring them together. No, it's just the way it was. It was, for me, I didn't feel the pressure of anything, and I have to thank my mom for that. I don't have that pressure or the stress that you have to teach your children. You have to. I think in the back of my brain, I know that she would have loved if they were completely fluent. But unfortunately, that's just not the reality for a lot of second generation or third generation kids, where they're getting further and further away from that when their parents are not really speaking that as a primary language to begin with.
Yeah.
I see that struggle. I see it every day. I live it. And
I think it's absolutely tough. But I think now we were mentioning there's so much better content out there, right? Or the volume of content out there. But I think it's important to get yourself really into what your kids are actually watching and what they're listening to, and be like, okay, you just heard that reggaeton song. Now I'm not gonna recommend that reggaeton be the one. Because a lot of that you don't want translated, but maybe because you know what, it's true. But I'm telling you, I know people, Hispanics, that don't speak a word of Spanish. They cannot verbalize the thought in Spanish, but they know every lyric of Bad Bunny's. They can sing the entire song, right? And so maybe not Bad Bunny, maybe nothing too grotesque, but maybe with your kids, okay, you like their song, you're jamming to that song. What do you think it's saying? Let's talk about what you think it's saying, So there's a real interest there,
It's funny because my son, I did that exact same thing. He was singing the Yo no soy celoso song. And I was like, so what's that about? What is it about? He's like, oh, it's about being jealous. Like, I'm not. I was like, what? Like, so he is like putting those things together. And deep down, I was like, oh, like.
No, nobody translate Despacito. Nobody translate Despacito, please. Yeah. No, suavemente. Siempre that damn song suavemente is gonna come out.
No, but you know what? Music is something that is universal. You have people that were dancing to not just Despacito, but mi gente, like literally J Balvin was out there singing this EDM song all in Spanish. And I will play that in one of my classes and people will go nuts. And I'm in Baltimore. There's not very many Hispanics that attend classes here, but they're out there jamming. And I'm like, come on, mi gente. And they're like, yes, like, but music is so universal. And right now we have people like Kane Brown and Karin Leon that are like, have a song that's in English and in Spanish.
Mhm.
And it's beautiful, and it's like a country song and a norteño song, and never in my like wildest dreams did I think that like I would be able to be like, hey Bella, listen to the song, and she'd be like, oh wow, that's really good. And then it kind of bridges both of the languages, like brings them together and makes it seem like it's not so crazy to speak both.
Yeah.
But I think that's another kind of case study that will be, because even before, you know, John Secada and Gloria Estefan and Ricky Martin and Paulina Rubio and Shakira, they were all doing dual
Yeah.
discs. Like they would record their record in English and they would record in Spanish. And so for the most part, the lyrics would translate. And I think at that point you would just choose which one you wanted to listen to.
Spanish was always better. The original was always better in Spanish.
Absolutely. But now I do like the idea that even some of the lyrics are in Spanglish, or the songs are in Spanish, and they're not choosing to facilitate or
Right.
trying to cater to, like, so, you know, it's just like, this is the song and this is what it is, and you're going to like it or learn it in a way so that you don't have to try to appease everyone.
Right.
I just wanted to say something very important now. I'm Spanglish and how, like, that's what it is. Like, that's the world that we are living. And for people who has families outside, it is important for them to understand as well. I cannot raise a Colombiano here in America because I don't have the option of that. Like, that's no, like, how forceful do I need to be in order to do that? Instead, and we tell him all the time, hey, we speak Spanish at home. That's who you are. That's the unique self that you are. And also we need to manage those expectations from people outside. Like, hey, sorry, if I'm in the United States and they are exposed to what they are exposed, we cannot raise them in any other way. So I guess it comes from the managing expectations come from everybody in the family. Like going back to, for example, the boss. It's important for the abuelita to know that unfortunately it's not in the cars that the kids are gonna talk perfectly Spanish.
And because you know what, some of those cousins in Colombia or in Peru, when you go, they want you to practice English with them too.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
because they're trying to learn English, and so the only if the only people that you can speak Spanish to are your abuelita, you know, and maybe a tia every now and then. I mean, you know, it's not. You're right. It's a very high expectation.
Well, and I think to that point too is managing expectations, but also, because I'm not diminishing it, this is a serious topic, but I've also found we can have a sense of humor about it to not have it be so serious or so strict.
Yeah.
Because I see it, you know, I still call my brother, who was like so attached to his Mexican roots, and I call him La Real Academia de la Lengua Española, because he is like, say it, that's not the word. And then you have like, my older sister, who would just, you know, she's like, it's in the congelator, el congelador, but she would just like translate. Or my dad, one day he forgot that, he's like, tengo una recuesta. Like, that's not a word, but just, you know, like, and so you can have, there can be a lightness to this topic too, of how we approach it, because it's hard. And I watch my mother battle it, because she's an abuela now, and she, to your point, like, she taught us something specific and she raised us in a certain way. Now she's watching my siblings do it in their own way. And at a certain point, she surrenders and she's like, well, I will speak to them in Spanish and they will answer in English or Spanish. But it's that surrender of like, this is how things are now, and embracing it too.
Absolutely.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because I was just out, you know, loitering, and my dad calls, and we were just talking, and he was asking me about the kids, and he started asking me about the movie Dune. And for some random reason, he ended up talking about my kids and just went off topic and said, you know what, I don't care what they do. how much money they make, you know, how they communicate, how often, because they text a lot, they don't call. They text back and forth. He's like, pero es el tipo de persona que son. He said, yo veo que, you know, what I taught them, like from our culture, the way you treat people, the way that you are with people. He said, eso es lo que me importa más sobre todo lo demás. Dice que sean buenas personas, como tratan a las personas, y eso viene de nuestra cultura. Um, y es que todos son bienvenidos, y hola, ¿qué tal? You know, you see somebody, le das abrazo, le das un beso, like, eso es lo más importante cuando uno está, you know, criando a sus hijos, es que sientan que tienen el amor, el apoyo de la familia, en cualquier lengua ellos desean comunicarse con uno, porque, I mean, believe you me, they'll talk to you via text, via, you know, voice message, or whatever, pero if it, like you, there's so much to focus on when you're a parent, and the language aspect of it is just, if you're able to do that and you're able to make that happen, then that's outstanding and kudos to you. But by all means, there is no pressure from, I would say, most of us in our generation, because we're all feeling it. We are all like living it with you. And if they talk Spanish, then that's awesome. And if they don't, guess what? Mine don't either, and that's okay. Like,
God, you made I feel so guilty now. Like I literally one time made my kid at the taco stand. ¿Quieres un taco? No, pues pídelo, pídelo, pídeselo. No, and we just stood there, and he's like, "Pídelo, pídelo." It's fine. But we went to Beirut not too long ago, about a year and a half ago, and as a teenager, and suddenly it was a place where he belonged, where a place that he came from, and he felt of the calling. And he's like, I just didn't know it was this cool, and just fell in love with the culture. And it happened to me when I was a kid. So if there's any possibility of, you know, maybe taking one trip down there, especially at that age, you know, I think it does wonders. You know, I don't want to just, again, we're talking a lot about kids, but not all of us have kids, right? And there's, you know, a huge growth in the multiracial, no, we're not raised, but multi-ethnic families in America right now. And in my particular case, my wife, she American Rachel, she took it upon herself to just start with Duolingo. You know, early on when we started dating, I didn't expect her to learn it. You know, I really didn't. It wasn't something that was, you know, something that was on my list as if I
It was not a
was. No. I mean, come on. Look, I mean, mírame. ¿Cuántos requerimientos voy a pedir yo? Every other weekend at my mom's house, you know, where we're at the dinner table, and so to interact in a closer way. And so I think that was very meaningful. And there's just so many tools, especially, you know, for an adult. And it's, again, they don't even have to, you know, get to the point where they're writing a business letter in Spanish, which, by the way, 90% of people who say they're perfectly bilingual, who speak Spanish perfectly, ask them to write un solo trámite que funciona ya. Olvídate. Ese es otro nivel de español.
Because when you were giving the tip of like one parent speak one language and all that stuff, I heard the same. I have heard many people talking about that. In my household, my husband is white, only speaking English. So when I started to raise my kids, I was like, okay, I will only speak in Spanish, you only speak in English. But it's a hard ask to start to someone, you know. And now he speaks Spanish like a 2 or 3 year old. But it was hard for me to tell him like, hey, like, don't speak in Spanish. Now that he was trying it, like, you can, because you're gonna break the system.
you're ruining the kids.
So I was always confused because that was so, we hear a lot of things that, and I'm not a language expert by no means. So it's important, the disclaimer. But I was like, so how does this, when my husband started to speak Spanish as well, and there is this thing where only one parent speak one language, so supposedly the kid doesn't start to speak with an accent. I was like, yeah, like it is a great tip, but in practicality, how it works. So I guess a lot of times when we hear things, some things are gonna apply to our families, and some things they are just done. And maybe one day I will find a parent that can explain me how this one body, one language works in the family. It didn't work, but
No, maybe because my mom and dad were not great at communicating with each other in any language, so it really didn't matter. So they communicated through us somehow, and so that's a whole other episode, which we'll talk about at the moment.
But you know what, being because I'm a military spouse, so being a military spouse, you do find a lot of, like Mexicana con Afroamericano, like you find, Colombians with white men, like you see this a lot. Germans, you see it all over, and I have seen it, and I do see it work, and the kids seem to be a-okay. Like the kids are so smart in their brain. They could like just separate things and put them together, bring them together. And I think we need to stop focusing on it has to be perfect at home o no va a funcionar. Like you just have to try it at home, and they will like. I literally had a girlfriend who is just American, married a German man, and all he did was speak the German, and she only spoke the English, and the child was perfectly fluent in both. And she spoke German. She spoke German and would communicate with her husband a couple of sayings, da 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 da. Like I would hear that, and that child, like now he's like 18 years old and is perfectly fluent in both. So I think we need to stop being afraid that we're gonna kind of break something. There's nothing to break. There's no rules. Like do what you can, do what you think you can. If you want to do a day of Spanish, then start with a day. Si crees que toda la semana, todos los días es mucho, because it would be a lot for me to speak Spanish every single day. But pick a Saturday, pick a Friday, pick a dinner. Like start small, then kind of go from there. Like vamos a cenar y todos los platos, and like la vajilla. Like I think we need to start thinking that it has to be everything all at once.
There you go.
And like do little chunks. Let's watch a movie and let's do it. What I did is let's do it in Spanish with English subtitles. So para que escuches lo que está pasando, but if you need to catch up, then you have the English subtitle to help you like beneath that. My kids learned at a very young age that shows came in all sorts of different languages. We went to Paris when they were little, and they were watching The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. I think that's what it was. And there was these two little kids, and they were born, they were being raised on a cruise ship or whatever. And they turned it on. They were so happy to see it. And they're like, wait, what is that? It was in French. I was like, yeah, all these shows come in all these different languages. And they're like, whoa, like minds were blown. So since then, like they would look like back then we had like the DVDs and you could select the different languages. Hey, let's just see what it sounds like in Spanish and in English and in French and whatever. So, I mean, or maybe that's what you do. Pick one movie that has the subtitles and turn it on in Spanish, especially if it's a movie that they know and that they've seen before and they love. I think start small and then kind of grow from there. It doesn't have to be, small chunks of that elephant, not the whole thing at once.
Hey, Mariana, I have a question for you, and I don't think I've asked you this before in our previous conversations, but it's a slight variation. When you're putting together an English class or a Spanish class, and you're thinking through, the whole flow and what's going to be on there, do you think English when you're producing both, or do you think in either language?
It's an interesting situation because unfortunately we're diversifying our team still. So in the beginning I had bilingual producers where we would work this, and right now everything is done in English, so everything is submitted in English. And then day of the class, even though my notes are in English and everything, just the translation happens.
Oh, so you're just translating live?
Yeah.
That moment?
Yeah.
No shit. Wow.
She's just being Mariana. She's just being Mariana.
I know.
Fabulous.
I know.
Like it just is. It's just like I'm right there chatting with my friend, and my friend saying, "No, si se puede," and I'm like, "Yes." Like it's all just like every conversation that you have, every point that you're telling us, everything. it's very natural, se ve, like it's not like, oh, I practice this or I need to read my note. And I'm not throwing shade on anyone, but you actually see some instructors who will scroll up, oh, I need to give this point right here. And then they kind of like pivot off of that, where with you, I feel like it's more natural. But I don't think that, I mean, for you, I think all of your classes just come out like it's you. No parece que es, like.
But I think that's how we're evolving even in our interactions. It doesn't feel even like forced or made up. And that's the beauty of kind of them letting me just take, like they let you be you on there, and there's nothing forced or there's something that you have to. I mean, she's no longer there, but I will say that at the beginning when I was onboarding, there was one of the producers that was there. She would say, she's like, "Can you sprinkle in that, spicy Mexican thing you do?" And I was like, "I don't know what the spicy Mexican thing I do." And it's. I thought it was a teachable moment, and I was like, "Please define that." And but it's that authenticity, and I even find it, when I'm talking to you, Victor, when I talk to Marisol here, like she's from Baja California, from Tijuana, and even though we both grew up in speaking Spanish, and we'll speak Spanish to each other, it shifts and it changes and it varies and it goes into Spanglish, and we'll pick up the English. Like that is kind of the way that things are moving now. And to your point before, and they said, like, it's okay. Like there is nothing strict or set in stone about how we have to do what we do. And so if we can keep it as colloquial and natural, and I even saw that in theater because there were these Latina playwrights that were like, how do I do a bilingual show that is in Spanish? But like even some of the dialogue felt a little forced because it was trying so hard to like get it right for both sides. But there really is no right or wrong. It's what feels, and that's why I love someone like Rad, who's just like, he's Dominicano raised in the Bronx. Like his is like a complete other language for me with him. And I love it. And I love that since he's like, this is me. And talk about someone who had the language, still speaks it to his mom, lost it a little bit, then through these jobs. And I'm so grateful because I live in New York. I don't use my Spanish all that often, but because this job requires me to come back and take it and use it and apply it, like that's kept me fresh. That's kept my brain actively working on it. So even Rad and like if we see each other in the locker room, podemos hablar en español, and then we switch it up. Like, and that, I think that's the norm, and I love that that's okay. Like that is, you can do the switch.
Sure.
Mariana, did you always teach yoga in Spanish, or did you start for Peloton?
No. So I would teach English here forever. I've been teaching, oh my gosh, 2009 is when I first started. So whenever that is.
I had to learn like workout.
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah.
I'm going to say.
For me, it was like.
No, when I moved to Mexico City, because I was applying, I lived in Mexico City, which again was a big factor of like retaking the language again, because I had not really used my Spanish aside from speaking to my parents here.
Right.
So living there, and I was like, oh, I want to teach yoga, but like I can't teach. And funnily enough, they gave me permission, like if I wanted to teach in English, but I was like, oh gosh, like let me try. And so even saying like perro mirando hacia abajo, the first time I was like, that sounded so foreign to me.
You have, I've seen so many comments about that, when someone loves a class and they first saw the group, just like what this person right here is saying, it's people are learning biology from you. Like a lot of people didn't know how to say anatomy, anatomy. Like people didn't know how to say shin in Spanish. So it's like, so you think you know Spanish, right? But I will say there, in defense of, not in defense, but because it's so different, like I can take a running class from you in English. I can do a yoga class with you in English. Meditation with Mariana in Spanish it can only be in Spanish.
It hits different
because it hits different. It's like you're talking to just find. There's a warmth that just connects in the weirdest thing, and honestly, I think that's the only way to do meditation is in Spanish, because it's like on that kind of stuff, I think of it in Spanish for some reason.
But I think those are the points, like, and meditation, or sometimes even with music, because of how we grew up, whatever generation, whatever country, there are phrases, song that tap into a nostalgia, that tap into like something that reminds you maybe growing up, or that your grandmother said, or that you heard, or like that just take you there. So it's this, and I remember you called it this, like a warm blanket, like it's this comfort zone. And so, I'm not a practicing religious soul these days, but I remember praying at night with my mother going to sleep. And so there's certain memories that I attach in the phrases and tu angelito de la guarda and like things like that that just kind of spark this memory and this like hug almost, that I think that some of those meditations, more than like the anatomical parts or poses, like the spoken word can bring that. And
Yep.
that's why I think those meditations in Spanish can be really special.
Well, and you bring up something interesting because I could do everything bilingual. I mean, but I can only pray in Spanish. Like I
Mm.
was
That's interesting.
like, I
Yeah.
guess I could say the Our Father in English, but it just hits different when I say it in Spanish or when I'm praying. Like, siento que my mom, like, and I think because my mom and I talk a lot about like religion in Spanish and continue and whatever. Like,
I do it in Latin.
No, but literally, and these are like ad hoc. I call them ad hoc prayers, not like the ones that you have to do Sunday at church. Cuando vas a la iglesia. Pero no sé orar en inglés. Like it just doesn't feel genuine to me. Like it's just so weird. And I'm like, it's and my brother the same. It's very interesting.
Well, there's something interesting to be said, and I just recently spoke about this with my therapist, which is a whole other topic we will broach, Victor, right? Terapia para los Latinos. But it was interesting because I got to go to this concert with our very own Rocio Fidalgo and Cindy Russo, who's from Texas. They were visiting, and they had invited. It was a '90s pop tour. And so it was so many bands and music that, Rocio grew up in Chile and Cindy was in El Salvador and I'm in Mexico. Well, I'm here, but there was something about going to that concert and singing in Spanish and like those songs that we grew up with that reminded us of our culture. Because for me, it wasn't even like, maybe I would listen to them in the car in San Diego, but then when I would go to Mexico, like it was just such a tie back to culture. And I remember I had a really severe, like the day after, like el bajón, like that, just like, because it was such a moment of memory and an attachment to how I grew up. And even though we were being raised here, of having some kind of lasso with Mexico. And it was through that. And now it was just speaking to like, how do I keep that alive? And I get to through classes, but it's those daily things or moments or resources or arts that you start to bring into your life to keep that connection. And that can be language. That's definitely one, but it can be so many other things too. And I just thought how beautiful, because like it reminded me of those meditations. It reminded me of like, why is this so warm and comforting? And I feel so tied back to something so important to me.
Yeah.
And it was that.
Absolutely. Well, man, I think this has been just an awesome conversation, and I think you wrapped it up there beautifully. I'm walking away with feeling okay about the job I tried to do, and feeling okay with the job I'm sure everybody is trying to do in this one portion of identity, of Latino identity, right? Because again, that's not all of it. But thank you so much. This again is going to be recorded. We'll be sharing it with everyone on our page. I would love for everyone to remember, PeLatinos is not the only group out there that is supporting our Latino instructors. Definitely, if you are a PeLatino, check out Mariana's Mariachis, both on Facebook and on Instagram. I know she runs the Rad Ones, so all about Rad's classes and such. Of course, Lamina Mafia. So it's definitely something I encourage for everyone to really plug into, and we'll be doing this far more often on a whole lot more topics such as therapy. Get ready.
It's not
All right.
taboo, y'all. It's not.
All right, guys. Dominique, thank you so much for volunteering and for being a part of this. Adam Rulo, thank you so much.
Gracias, Victor.
Un abrazo a todos. Bye bye.
Adios.